Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the city stakeholders meeting for the Jesuit Retreat Center. I'm Joe Meinert, the City of Bowie Planning Director, and I'm here to help with some of the questions and the logistics of the meeting. This is a stakeholders meeting, which is being sponsored by the city. This meeting is actually being recorded and is being shown live on the city's cable TV channel. Only the people who have signed up and registered to participate tonight will be able to ask questions during the meeting. And the way that we ask the questions is that you use the question and answer function in Zoom. At the appropriate time, I will read all of the questions that came in as time allows, and hopefully we'll have the panel of experts answer the questions as best they can. So this meeting is really for the invitees only to participate, only those who are registered. We will place a copy of the recording on the city's YouTube channel for future viewing. At this time, I'd like to turn the meeting over to the representative of the Jesuits, which is Father Bob Hussey. Bob.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and I am going to share my screen with you so that you can see what we're going to be talking about this evening. So let me bring that up for us here. Very good. So as Joe mentioned, my name is Father Bob Hussey. I am with the Jesuits, the USA East Province, and I'd like to thank Joe and the city of Bowie for hosting this meeting this evening, and thank all of you all for your time and your interest in participating. The purpose of this meeting and this presentation is to share with you a concept we have for developing a religious retreat center on the Jesuit land near Bowie. So a number of us are going to be presenting this evening. Myself, this list of people will be either talking during the presentation or be available to answer questions. So Brad Froman, Justin Ross, Chip Reed, Mike Lenhart on traffic, and Tim Madden and Courtney Gallagher, who have worked on a site plan for us. So the proposal that we are talking about is to create a Jesuit retreat center offering religious retreats in a quiet, prayerful setting surrounded by natural wooded areas. So let me provide a little bit of background and context for this proposal. The Jesuits are the largest men's religious order in the Catholic Church, and one of the core works that we do is in the area of spirituality. And by that, I mean providing people opportunities for deepening their spirituality or helping people to learn to pray and to explore their spiritual experience. We Jesuits have a particular focus on what we call Ignatian spirituality, which is an approach to spirituality named for the founder of the Jesuits, Ignatius of Loyola. A key way that we do this work of spirituality is through retreat centers, places where people can take some time apart from their regular lives for a deeper prayerful experience. And we have retreat centers spread around the country and actually around the world. We Jesuits have recently gone through a realignment of our provinces, creating a single province on the East Coast. And as part of that realignment, we've been doing some planning for our ministry of retreat centers within the province on the East Coast, and asking what are the kinds of investments that we want to make so that this ministry can be vibrant and attractive for the future. So this particular proposal that we're talking about this evening for creating a Jesuit retreat center near Bowie is part of that context and that planning for our overall ministry of retreat centers, and we wanted to have a new and vibrant center that's kind of around the middle of the East Coast and near the urban areas of Washington and Baltimore and all that surrounds that. So the location for this that we're proposing for this center is a 36-acre site that's south of Route 450 and west of Sacred Heart Parish. So this would be a use of that land that on the one hand is at the core of our mission as Jesuits, but that on the other hand, we also hope will be appealing to the residents of Bowie and the area as a kind of low intensity use of the land that will preserve much of the wooded beauty and rural feel of that place. So let me show you just a map of where I'm talking about. You see in the center with the red outline and the label site, the particular piece of land that we're talking about and where that sits relative to the city of Bowie. So the site is about 36 acres. It is along Route 450, and it's surrounded by Sacred Heart Church and White Marsh Park. It actually sits right at the edge of the Bowie city limit, so it is not incorporated in the city. And you can see just from this satellite view that the site itself is quite wooded, like the surrounding properties around it. Now, this evening, and this proposal really only deals with this site. We're not talking about any of the other Jesuit land around there. We're only dealing with a proposal for this one particular 36-acre piece of land. So let me give you a little bit of a roadmap of where we're going with our presentation this evening. First, I'm going to talk some about just the concept of a retreat center, what a retreat center actually is, so you have some idea of what it is, what this facility is. Then I'm going to talk about some of the physical elements of the center, what the building would look like. And then I want to look at some examples of actual retreat centers with some images so that you can get a real feel for what this will look like. We're then going to present a conceptual site plan, just a sense of how this a retreat center might actually fit onto and be placed on this particular site. And then we're going to talk about what kind of impact would this center have on traffic in the area. And then finally, we'll talk about what would be the next steps in this process of moving towards approval and development of this center. And then in the end, we'll have time for questions from those of you who are listening. So that's where we're going this evening. So let me talk a little bit about the concept of retreat center, what a Jesuit retreat center actually is, so that we can all understand what it is that's being proposed. Throughout the presentation this evening, there are going to be various images that appear on the slides. All of these images are taken from existing retreat centers. So from our experience of actually running retreat centers in other places, we can give you a sense of what retreat centers actually look like and how they function. So let's look at the slides. So what is a retreat center? Well, it's a prayerful place of reflection that offers retreats in the Jesuit and Catholic tradition, though people and groups of other denominations are welcome at the center and welcome to participate in the programs. The center would offer its own retreat programs, and it also would host retreats that would be offered by outside groups that wanted to use the center. The retreat center offers retreats that can last several days, over a weekend, even up to a month long. But it also offers programs that just happen during the day, a single day, or in the evening. The center includes overnight accommodations for retreatants. And And the center that we're proposing would be similar in mission to other Jesuit retreat centers around the country. And as with all our retreat centers, we are very interested in preserving the property as wooded as possible, and with some walking paths to keep the natural feel of the area. So let me talk a little bit about physically what would go into the center. What are the physical elements of the building? So we imagine that there would be a main chapel in the building that would accommodate about 80 people, and also a smaller chapel accommodating about 20. As I said, the center would have overnight accommodation, so there would be approximately 75 bedrooms, each with its own bath. Though these rooms are smaller and more austere than, say, a standard hotel room or conference room. There would be dining facilities to accommodate about 100 people. There would be gathering rooms for various purposes, an outside patio gathering area. We would also consider having a few small cabins apart from the main building that serve as kind of hermitages for private retreats. And there would be walking paths through the woods, and of course, a parking area too. So to give you an example of a center that's as similar as we can come up to with to what we're proposing here in the Bowie area, the best example, the closest thing is, it's very similar to the Ignatius House Jesuit Retreat Center in the Atlanta area. So like Atlanta, it's fairly near a larger urban area. In fact, the center in Atlanta is just 2 miles outside of the Atlanta Beltway, or the perimeter as they call it there. The Atlanta site works on a 20-acre site. The site that we're proposing near Bowie is larger than that. It's about 36 acres. And in Atlanta, even on that size site, the building can be very peacefully nested away from the road and from other properties in the area. The Atlanta site has 50 bedrooms. As I said, we are proposing a site in Bowie of about 75, so a retreat center about 50% larger than the one in Atlanta. The Atlanta site is about 26,000 square feet total of buildings and 65 parking places. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of what would be a similar center in a similar location relative to urban areas. This is an aerial view of the retreat center in Atlanta. And as you can see, kind of where the buildings are, but the land is really maintained as wooded all around. The amount of space that's actually taken up by buildings, the amount of forest disturbances is really fairly minimal here. Just to give you an example on the number of people who would come to a center. So for the whole year of 2018 in Atlanta, there were 2,250 people who participated in overnight retreat programs, and a little over 4,000 people who participated in day programs. So the Jesuit Retreat Center in Atlanta and these images give us a little bit of a sense of kind of function and location and visually what the center would look like that we're proposing in the Bowie area. I want to also show you a couple other examples of retreat centers in the country that have been built fairly recently. So this center is the Joyce Contemplative Center. It's part of the College of the Holy Cross in Massachusetts. You can see it's a contemporary building, but again, surrounded by wooded area. So preserving the natural environment is key and integral to the function of the center, and very doable with this kind of programming that we're talking about. A third example, just to give you some visual sense, is the St. Francis Springs Prayer Center. This center is actually not a Jesuit center. It's a Franciscan center located in North Carolina. And once again, you see more recent construction, but the surrounded wooded area is preserved. You'll notice in the smaller picture embedded in the upper right-hand corner, this particular center has some of those outbuildings that are like hermitages that I referred to earlier. So you see a kind of walking path with a couple of small cabins located along that path. So again, another visual image of what this might look like. So we wanted to develop and give you a sense of, on this particular site in Bowie, what a conceptual site plan might look like. The idea is, how might this facility be sited and located on the actual land in Bowie? I want to emphasize as we look through this that this is really just a concept to consider. We're not presenting at this point an architectural plan. The exact program for the building's not set yet. Some actual design of the center would be something that comes down the road. But this concept at least shows us how the center could be located on the land and how it's meant to take advantage of the surrounding area and surrounding nature. So I'd like to hand the presentation over at this point to Tim Madden and Courtney Gallagher, who are engineers who worked with us to develop this conceptual site plan. So Tim, if you would, please.
Thank you, Father. Again, my name is Tim Madden with Morris and Ritchie Associates, and we've studied this property for a number of years. Actually have performed LiDAR-based aerial survey of the property, and natural resources inventory, forest stand delineation has been completed. We've identified all the natural resources on the property, the boundaries of the property, studied it in great detail for hydrology and soils. And that's where you begin when you consider a piece of property for a particular use. You consider all the factors of soils, slope, views, screening, entrance constraints, site distance, for example, traffic and movement in and out of the site, drainage patterns and drainage outfalls, limits of disturbance, and so forth. What we have here on the screen is an existing features and site constraints diagram that we've developed from all this information that we have collected on the property. And included on this plan is, in yellow, the strip of land that has been identified in the master plan, the county master plan, for the ultimate improvement and widening of Maryland Route 450. There's nothing there now except the wooded portion of the site, but it is reserved on the master plan for future improvements to Maryland 450. We've identified in the orange color the steep slopes. The green areas are the primary buffer areas of the drainage areas. This site also, we show the topography on there in 2-foot contours. And the site falls away from Maryland Route 450. It enjoys about 1,500 linear feet of frontage along Maryland Route 450. And generally speaking, the topography falls away from Maryland 450. And the entire site drains to a tributary of the White Marsh Branch. So the green areas are the buffer areas to those water courses, and the blue are the seeps and ephemeral streams that flow to White Marsh Branch, which is actually coursing east to west or west to east on the City of Bowie property. So it flows into that. And also you see little black dots with circles on them, which are all the specimen trees that we have identified on the property and inventoried. And this diagram provides us with the information we need to locate the potential areas for access to the property, that those areas that meet the site distance and the turning lane requirements are shown by the white dashed arrows. And it kind of shows you the pathway to a sensitive development of this 36-acre property. So our goal here is to take advantage of the topography and the constraints and form a land area, land bay, if you will, for the development of this sensitive facility, and utilize the natural beauty and the contour of the land and the wooded features to create the setting that is appropriate for a retreat center. I'm going to ask Courtney now to take over, and we'll go to the next slide and we'll explain a little bit more about our development concept.
All right, good evening, everyone. As Tim mentioned, my name is Courtney Gallagher, and I'm a senior landscape architect with Morris and Ritchie Associates. So after reviewing the site for existing features and constraints that Tim just went through, we identified what we feel is the most suitable location for the retreat facility. The selected site is highlighted in a pale green color on the exhibit on your screen, and it's situated towards the back half of the property. The site we selected is situated on relatively level grade between areas of steep slopes to the north and south and the primary management areas associated with the on-site streams to the east and west. The area that we've identified is approximately 5 acres. The site has very few specimen trees, and it's in a relatively low area on the property, but is at a localized high point at the top of 2 small ridges. All of these conditions informed our decision for choosing this site for the retreat center development. Some of the other benefits of this location is that it sits back approximately 700 feet from Route 450, and there are wooded knolls to the north and east of the site that will provide screening from the road and adjacent properties. In addition to screening, these knolls will provide a nice natural backdrop for the guests at the retreat. To the south and west of the retreat site, the grades drop down to the on-site streams, which will provide nice vistas for retreat guests as well. Identified on the exhibit here is an approximate entrance drive alignment, which is shown in the thick dashed red line. We chose the entrance location opposite the existing entrance into the Cornerstone Church parking lot. The proposed alignment meanders from Route 450 through the property to the retreat center site. We meandered the road intentionally for several reasons. First being that this alignment allows us to work more closely with the existing grades on site, which will minimize clearing, which we've previously stated is an important feature for this development. In addition, this alignment will minimize impacts to sensitive features on the site, like steep slopes, specimen trees, and stream buffers. In addition, meandering the road helps to minimize the visual impact of that entrance drive from adjacent properties and Route 450. And it will provide for a discovery approach to the retreat center for visitors. I will discuss the retreat center components in more detail on the next slide, but first I'd like to identify some other features that we hope to include as part of the retreat. On the exhibit here in sort of the dark orange dotted line, we're showing potential alignments for nature trails that will run throughout the site and will allow visitors to enjoy the natural features of the property. And we've also identified a few potential locations for smaller hermitage cabins. Both of these features will be located in ways that will work with the existing grades and minimize impacts and clearing. In short, the goal of the proposed development concept is to work with the existing site features and grades to minimize impacts to environmentally sensitive areas, to minimize visual impacts to adjacent properties and to create a retreat center that feels like it's in harmony with the site. If you could please advance to the next slide. So here we show a little more detail of the retreat center components and immediate site vicinity. The main drive will bring guests and visitors to a small parking area and drop off. As previously described, the retreat building will contain both small and larger gathering areas, as well as guest lodging. We also envision outdoor gathering areas, and there'll be service areas associated with supporting all of these features. The sizing of the features shown in this concept plan were based on the Ignatius House Retreat Center in Atlanta. And we've tried to provide a conceptual arrangement of these components in a way that works efficiently within the sort of developable envelope and takes advantage of natural screening and vistas on the property. Tim, is there anything else that you would like to add?
I think that covers it, Courtney.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mike Lenhart with Lenhart Traffic Consulting, and we did prepare a traffic statement to go along with this application. If you go to the next page, please. So this use, typically when you evaluate traffic impacts from any given site, you would use the local park and planning trip generation rates. They do have local rates for different types of uses. The other source would be the Institute for Transportation Engineers has a trip generation manual, which is a nationally recognized publication with thousands of pieces of data in it related to the traffic that's generated by different uses. This type of use is it's a unique and not part of any of the pre-studied or pre-scheduled uses. And so in order to look at this use, we really had to kind of take a look at the use itself, the different components, programs, and annual participants based on the Atlanta facility, which is very similar in nature, only this use would be about 50% larger than the Atlanta site. So we worked with the applicant in this case and identified the actual usage at the Atlanta site. This table that you see here, we have weekend retreats, outside group, overnight, and this is the column on the left-hand side. There's overnight groups, longer retreats, there's day programs that end by 3 p.m., and then evening programs that are largely after 7 p.m. And those annual participants for each of those types of uses were then broken down into whether they would arrive or depart during the morning or evening peak periods. Morning and evening peak period is defined as 6:30 to 9:30 a.m. in the morning and 4 to 7 p.m. in the evening peak hour. And what we're looking for is trying to identify the traffic that will use the site during those 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the evening, but we're trying to focus it down to the traffic that would come in and out during a 60-minute period, the peak 60-minute period in the morning and evening peak hour. And in doing so, what we determined that the Atlanta location generates about 13 20 trips in the morning peak hour, and this is going off of my slide, then about 15 trips in the evening peak hour. That's the Bowie location based upon a 50% increase from the Atlanta location. So it's about 20 trips in the morning peak hour during a 60-minute peak period, and 15 minutes in the evening during a 60-minute peak period. Next slide, please. And so to restate that, the site will generate about 20 trips during the morning peak hour, 60-minute peak period, 15 trips in the evening peak hour. The photo that you see here is the access at the Atlanta site. And this was shown to provide some context of what that actual driveway looks like. We did look at traffic along Route 450 at Racetrack Road, being the closest arterial roadway to the site. We used traffic counts from the Maryland 450 at Racetrack Road during pre-COVID timeframes, and we also looked at the driveway of the site on Route 450. And both of those intersections would operate at acceptable levels of service based upon the Prince George's County guidelines that will be required to be looked at when this goes forward into the preliminary plan of subdivision. The Route 450 does have an existing center turn lane that's currently striped out, but there is a 12-foot lane in the center of Route 450, and we would recommend restriping that to provide a dedicated left turn lane into the site. While it doesn't really meet the warrants criteria for a left turn lane, we feel it would be beneficial to use that existing area to provide a dedicated left turn. And the study has been provided to the city, and I believe that is available on their website. Thank you.
If we could go to the next slide, please.
So thank you, Mike, for that presentation, and also to Tim and Courtney on the site plan. We're now going to talk about what would be the steps forward, the next steps in the process towards developing plans and approval to move forward with this. And for that, I'll hand the presentation over to Brad Fromm.
Thank you, Father. Good evening, everybody. Brad Fromm, Perrywood, Roston Jacobs, just to talk about the, as Father Husty mentioned, the process going forward. Just to be clear, as Father Husty mentioned earlier, what we're talking about is this specific parcel that he mentioned on the map about 3 slides in, and the specific use that we've been talking about tonight. Currently, there is no use in the use tables in the county for a retreat center such as the one that we've been proposing and what we're talking about tonight. Therefore, as a first step, we'd like to pursue legislation to create such a use that will be allowed in this zone that the property's in, which is the RA zone, under limited circumstances. Such legislation, by our preference, would include a requirement for a detailed site plan, and this would have the effect of maximizing public participation and awareness of the actual contours of the building, as Father Husty mentioned, once those details are put together. Notably, want to emphasize we're not seeking to rezone the property, only to allow this specific use on the property. Therefore, if elected officials, notably the county council, but also ideally with the support of the city of Bowie, would embrace this concept and embrace the methodology of allowing this use that we've discussed tonight, we'd be looking at the following process. Step one would be legislation to amend the use table to allow this use, a retreat center. Step two would be a preliminary plan of subdivision. This is where you test the adequacy for a project. If it were residential, it'd be schools. For us, as Mike mentioned, it would be primarily traffic impacts. And then the third step would be a detailed site plan. This is where you review the layout and the design of the building itself, look at the actual. This is where it ceases to be a conceptual layout and you actually see the exact placement of the building and what exactly the building is going to look like. All of these three steps would have notice to the public. There would be an ability to become a party of record for the preliminary plan of subdivision and the detailed site plan. And there would be an ability for members of the public to testify on all three of these elements. I just want to reemphasize, or emphasize rather, that this would be our preference for the process going forward. But to actually take the first step, which would be allowed for this use, that would be a decision that would be made by the County Council of Prince George's County. Father, I'd like to turn it back over to you.
Very good. Thank you, Brad. So we're going to move on now to some time for questions. So I'm going to unshare my screen and let Joe Meinert direct those questions.
Okay, thank you, Father. And again, for everyone, I'm Joe Meinert. I'm the City of Bowie Planning Director. We're sponsoring this stakeholders meeting tonight. The way that we will take questions is through the question and answer function in Zoom. So just at the bottom of your screen, if you just hover over the Q&A, you have the ability to type a question in, and we'll try to get all the questions answered before the meeting is adjourned around 9 o'clock at the latest. So at this point, we do have a couple of questions that are in the queue, and I will read the questions and direct them to Father Bob to follow up as appropriate. The first question is regarding the walking paths. Will the walking paths be available to the public, and would the paths connect to the adjacent park? Father Bob?
Thank you for that question. In our different retreat centers, we have different policies on the access to the grounds by the public. It sort of depends on the intensity of demand. If demand is so much that it gets in the way of the quiet of the retreat center, then there are times that we need to limit public access to the ground. So it's sort of, we attempt to allow the public use it and see what the intensity of demand is. As in the current conceptual site plan, there is not a connection to the existing walking paths in White Marsh Park. So that's not in the design right now. Courtney, I don't know if you'd like to add anything to that as in your design for this paths.
At this point, we have not identified where all the walking paths within White Marsh Park are located, so we have not accommodated that in the current design, but that's something that if if the project moves forward, that we could definitely study as a possibility. But at this point, it hasn't been incorporated into the plan.
Thank you.
Okay, Father, I'll move to the next question, and this is one from Delegate Geraldine Valentino Smith, and she asks, will the Jesuits be seeking zoning changes on any of the other parcels they own surrounding the Sacred Heart area and across the street? Are there future plans to change the zoning for future residential development or future sale of the surrounding Jesuit property?
Thanks for that question. Right now, we are only talking about this 36-acre site. And as Brad explained, the approval we want for that, we don't have any other existing plans for now for development of other parts of the Jesuit land.
Okay, thank you for that answer. The next input was not a question, but a comment. The writer says, this seems like the second best use for the property. Not developing anything would be better. So I applaud the concept. I understand the current zoning for the property is RA, 2-acre lots. That would require adjustment for the project, such as the proposed retreat. The county would likely adjust the zoning by text amendment. Since that usually happens without significant public comment, I encourage the city to be vigilant and ensure that only the parcel to be developed for the retreat is included in the text amendment to prevent conflict about future development denser than RA. So that's just a comment that's been made by one of our attendees. The next participant asks or makes the comment, it seems that the concept of a retreat is often quiet reflection. Although there are some woods, Route 450 is very busy both on weekdays and weekends. That is anything but quiet, especially in the winter when the trees are bare. Why was this location considered for a retreat, as it seems it would not be a contemplative setting? Father?
Sure. And I think what most helps us with that is comparison to the Atlanta Center. The Atlanta Center itself is also on located on a fairly busy road near an urban area. So we always have it, and yet it's able to function because of withdrawal from the road and maintain a silent atmosphere. So we have an even smaller site in Atlanta that's able to successfully achieve the kind of peacefulness that we want for a retreat center. When we look at sites for centers, there is always a kind of trade-off. On the one hand, you desire something as much removed as possible for that peacefulness and quiet. On the other hand, there are advantages to not being too distant from larger population centers and various kinds of public transportation, so that the retreat center can be available to lots of people and fully utilized. And so we feel like the site in Bowie achieves a nice balance in those different criteria, and does achieve the kind of quiet, peaceful setting, as we know from specific examples like the Atlanta Center for doing that. As Courtney also pointed out in her description of the site plan, the center itself is quite distant from the road, as are many of the walking paths. There's the large slope between the building and the land, which itself provides a kind of natural sound buffer in addition to being a visual buffer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Father. That took care of that question pretty thoroughly. We now have a few questions related to traffic and infrastructure. The next participant writes, in the traffic study, were left turns from the property considered? As a member of Sacred Heart Parish, I have firsthand knowledge of how difficult and dangerous it can be turning left onto Route 450.
Yes, I'm sorry. We
Yes,
did. The
please,
traffic study does include the turning movements in and out of the site: left turns in, left turns out, right turns in, right turns out, and the park and planning. At the time we go through the preliminary plan of subdivision, we will have to be tested for adequate public facilities. Park and planning has a 3-step process for unsignalized intersections. And this driveway will be a typical stop controlled intersection that you come out of. And we did run the test, and it does pass the park and planning's 3-step process. And that does not mean that you will pull up to the stop sign and be able to turn left with no delay. Route 450 has traffic on it. There are gaps that are created by the signal at Racetrack Road. And so, there's likely, particularly during the peak hours, you would have to wait for a gap to occur. But The volumes in and out of the site are fairly low, and based on our study, it will pass that analysis.
Okay, thank you, Mike. A couple of questions related to infrastructure. One was, how would the sewage be handled on the site through a septic field? And also, how will stormwater management be handled on the site? And has the land needed for that have been considered in your limits of disturbance? Father?
I will let Tim respond to
Sure.
that, if you would.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for that question. The proposal would be to connect this facility to public sewer and public water. And the access for that would be in the most appropriate way. We would most probably utilize the access road for access to public water. And then public sewer would be connected through a series of easements to existing sewer lines. That would be important. We would not want to use on-site septic fields for this type of facility. The stormwater management has been well thought out already in concept. It would meet the standard water quality management requirements of the day in bioretention and other sensitive facilities sited around the perimeter of the building. There may be other water saving features imparted into the building program, such as cisterns, green roofs, whatever. But in each case, the facilities would be designed to manage the first flush of rainwater, 2 inches or so, off of all new impervious and cleared surfaces in small facilities that will be located around the perimeter of the disturbed area. Linear bioswales along the access road would be the most appropriate for the treatment of the road surfaces. All those would be identified and designed to accommodate the existing soils on the site and to meet the runoff requirements that are generated from the development. In addition to that, any peak management requirements that's generated from the clearing of the approximate 5 acres on this 37-acre parcel would be also provided within the perimeter of that disturbed area. So would be no need to disturb additional area. We have accommodated adequate location and space to manage stormwater within that envelope.
Okay, little bit of overlap now with this next question, but there are some other aspects that I think have not been covered yet. The question is, I appreciate your respect for the natural area going into this project. Will you be committing to climate-friendly practices as far as efficiency of the building, the use of renewable energy, EV charging stations, and the use of bioretention, native plantings, and the use of pervious surfaces as much as possible? Father?
So yes, that would very much be of interest of ours to do when we actually get to the point of designing an actual building. We have done that in other recent buildings we have built. It fits with our priorities of environmental concern. And so that would be a priority for us to incorporate those kinds of practices when we reach the design phase. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, the next input comes from Michael Rauch, and he says, I have a comment and a question. Thanks for the very detailed and organized presentation. I think the plan is terrific, and I think the use is a good fit for the community. The only concern I see is that there isn't much space for that left turning lane on Route 450. The lanes are very tight in that location. Given that the state plan for widening Route 450 is many years away, Are there any plans to widen Route 450 adjacent to the site? Father Bob?
I'll let Mike address that if he could, please.
Yes, the preliminary measurements we did indicated that that left turn lane is roughly 12 feet wide, give or take a foot or two. And we would work with State Highway Administration in the permitting of that movement to ensure that it's something that meets their standards and is adequate and safe. But at this point, we do believe we can fit that in there.
Just a follow-up question. One of the participants asked if we know what improvements on Route 450 are expected, such as signalization or frontage, sidewalks, any physical improvements that you might be able to name at this point.
At this point, we're not expecting any improvements. We don't believe that people would be walking to and from this site. People would be coming from a distance to come here for a retreat experience. We don't believe that there would be any accel decel necessary. We believe the left turn lane in would be sufficient, and there would be obviously a cut in for the driveway and probably some grading to make that work as needed. We may need to cut back a little bit of shrubbery just to make sure we have adequate sight distance, but we believe that we can make that work. Those are all details that we will get into when we get into the permit stage with State Highway Administration.
Okay, thank you, Mike. To stick with the traffic theme, I have one more question about traffic. This participant writes, I heard traffic addressed for Route 450 West, but not Route 450 East from Racetrack Road. Currently, traffic eastbound can back up on 450. How does the plan mitigate additional traffic for the retreat?
Well, the traffic study and the adequate public facilities requirements are based upon park and planning criteria. And they have a scale of the level of evaluation that is required depending on how much traffic is generated. If the site generates fewer than 5 peak hour trips, it's considered de minimis and has no significant impact. If it is between 5 and 20 trips, then you really only need to look at your site access and the closest major intersection to the site. In this case, that would be Racetrack Road. If you generate greater than 20 up to 50 trips, you would look at another intersection in the other direction from the site, the next major intersection in the other direction. And if you generate more than 50 peak hour trips, you have to do a full traffic impact study that gets scoped out with park and planning, and it would be a more significant study area. And so based upon the size and scope and the use, which is not a high trip generation use, we believe that the scope of the study will be very limited when we get to park and planning.
Thank you, Mike. There is another related question to the traffic study, and that is, what are the projected numbers of administrative and support staff, and did the projected traffic analysis take those numbers into account?
Yes, that's a good question. It was provided to us that the Atlanta site has, I believe the number was 6 administrative support staff, full-time support staff that would come and go during peak hours. And given that this site is 50% larger, it's our estimation that there would be 9 full-time support staff that would arrive and depart during peak hours. We took the worst case scenario that they would all 9 would arrive in 1 hour in the morning, and all 9 would depart during 1 hour in the evening. Trip generation studies show that generally it's more conservative than that. It would be, a half a person every hour, more or less one every 2 hours would arrive. So we've taken a worst case scenario in terms of how the administrative staff would arrive and affect traffic.
Okay, thank you, Mike. The next question is about light pollution. Light pollution from Bowie shines through the trees in winter to the homes in Forest Hills. Will there be a study to evaluate how much additional light pollution this project will add? Father Bob?
We can certainly do that. Generally speaking, though our retreat centers are tranquil places, they are not large light producers. But we could certainly take that into account when we reach the design phase.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Father. The next question is, would there be any members of the Jesuit community in residence at the site, or is it intended only for guests? The reason for the question is that will there be someone living on the site 24/7?
We do not imagine that anyone would have a permanent residence here. There would not be a Jesuit community located there or Jesuits living on the property. Certainly, if there are times when retreatants are present, there would be some kind of staff responsible who is available and around, but not living on the property.
Okay, the next question here is, since the Jesuits have no current plans to advocate for zoning changes on the remaining parcels across Route 450, is there a written commitment the Jesuits can make that if residents do in fact support the building of the retreat center, that the zoning will not be altered in the future, which will allow further building on the remaining parcels? Father?
Maybe I'm going to let Brad address this, if you could, Brad, for us. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I would say that again, the matter before us is this property, and we're seeking to allow this use on this specific property. I would have to think that the other properties, again, we're not looking for any zoning change for those properties, but at the same token, I wouldn't advocate that my client agree to what the future may hold is different from what's in front of us now. And again, the only thing we're asking for right now is to allow this use on this property. Anything on additional property or in the future is a different conversation, and it's certainly nothing that's in front of us right now.
Okay, thank you, Brad. I did want to mention to the participants out there that we're down to about 1 or 2 extra questions here. If anyone intends to ask questions, please use the question and answer function at the bottom of the screen and type your questions in. The next question we have is from Pete Mellitz. Nice general presentation by all. And his questions are, how will on-site parking be accommodated given the number of people anticipated to visit? Will the visitors attend via bus versus by individual car? The water and sewer sought will be serviced by the City of Bowie or WSSC. Thank you, Pete Mellitz. So there's multiple questions there. Father, did you catch them all?
Sure, I can talk about the parking. So so again, based off the Atlanta site has 65 parking spaces, which experience has proved more than adequate for their use. We're anticipating a center about 50% larger and would plan parking accordingly. So that would accommodate, really peak moments when, large numbers of people are coming in individual cars. There are many of these groups where there is at least some carpooling, and certainly when groups come, they come with less density than that. So, if you would dig into the numbers of the traffic study, again, this wasn't for parking, the large outside groups generate fewer trips because they do tend to come in groups or in a bus perhaps. but we feel like the parking that we've allocated in the current conceptual site plan is adequate from what we know intensity of demand would be from actual experience in a similar retreat center.
Okay, and the water and sewer question, Father, do you have any answers?
And I'm going to let Tim address that. So
yes. Well, we're early in the land planning process. At the appropriate time, we certainly have made assessments of the existing public water and sewer facilities that serve the property. At the appropriate time, we will make arrangements and perform the necessary design to connect it as appropriate for this use. WSSC, we've been in conversations with the city about their facilities, and we'll make an appropriate decision at that time.
Okay, thank you, Mike. We do have a few more questions that have come in, and the next one is, what coordination has been done with Sacred Heart? Father Bob?
Sure. So I have had conversations with the pastor at Sacred Heart and also with the Archdiocese, with the Archbishop, now Cardinal, and Auxiliary Bishop Fisher. And so they are well aware of that. And I invited Father Potts, the pastor, to share the information with his parishioners and said I would make myself available to speak with them. He's not asked me to do that, but I have had conversations with the parish through the pastor and offered to be available to others there.
Thank you for that answer, Father. The next question, I think it was covered a little bit earlier about the anticipated timeframes for the remaining phases of the project. If you could walk through those phases again, please.
I'll turn that back over to Brad. He covered that part of the presentation. Yes.
Right. If we're talking about the process going forward, it would be a legislative amendment to the zoning ordinance to create a use for a retreat center, which then would allow that use on this specific property. Again, our preference would be that would also have a requirement for a detailed site plan. Step 2 would be preliminary plan of subdivision. That's where, as Mike mentioned, that's where you test adequacy, specifically for this project, transportation and traffic adequacy. And then the third step would be a detailed site plan. A detailed site plan is that's where you really design the building. You show where it's going to be located. You show the height. You show the materials that are going to be used on the building. Your stormwater, a lot of your stormwater facilities, as Tim mentioned earlier, they get locked in at that stage of the process. They get preliminarily staged in at preliminary plan of subdivision, but they really get locked into place during your detailed site plan. That's when the actual contours of the development get determined. Each of those three processes would have public participation. They'd have public notice. For preliminary plan of subdivision, detailed site plan, people can become a party of record and get every mailing that's related to the application. But again, just as I mentioned earlier, that's the process that's the path that we would like to walk on. The decision as far as that first step, as far as the use, that would be a decision that would be made by the Prince George's County Council.
Okay, the next few questions are kind of along the same lines related to the balance of the property. The first question is, if access is made available to the Bowie water and sewer system, would this be for the proposed retreat buildings, but not for any possible future development of the land? Father, is there an answer to that question?
Again, we're only talking about the proposal on the 36-acre site now. This proposal doesn't have anything to do with plans of any sort, including sewer access for any other parts of the Jesuit land at this point. So.
Okay, I think that point has been made multiple times, and I think a lot of people are interested in what's going to happen with the remaining property there, but I think you've answered the question. I did want to mention, just as something I remembered, Mike Lenhart's study, the traffic study. We did receive it today at the city, but we have not had a chance to post it on the website as of today. It should be up there tomorrow on the city website. Here's a question about traffic, and that's why I was reminded about the traffic study. The map showed that the expected entrance opposite the unused entrance to Cornerstone Church. Why there?
Tim, that might be better for you to take, Tim, as far as the site layout and the
Certainly.
Everything.
Certainly. Well, in looking at the site distance requirements for this entrance, looking both east and west, it is one of the locations that works. And it's favored by us because the topography at that location provides a pathway, a route that is least impactive on the land to gain access to the land bay that we want to develop. So that's why it's preferred. And we think it's appropriate because of the configuration of Maryland 450 in front of it. But most importantly, it is the most suitable location that we find to provide access to the developable land bay that we've identified back in the south end of the property.
Okay, thank you, Tim. The next question was, best case scenario, when would you imagine the retreat center opening? Father Bob?
That's a difficult question to answer because there's so many stages along the line, but it would be years into the future to get through all the different steps that would be part of this. So I hesitate to speculate, but just Brad explained, just the approval to move forward with this alone is itself complicated enough and potentially time consuming enough that before you even get into design and construction, it's a long, years long process.
Okay, got that. The next question is of a historic nature. Will there be any recognition of the historical nature of the site dating back to the founding of the church in the area and the selection of our first bishop?
We haven't gotten to that level of planning of what would be on the site, but that kind of recognition, I think we would value and would be very appropriate.
Okay, that's something that obviously would be addressed as the project moves further along and gains some more detail.
Right.
Here's another traffic related question. I travel Route 450 daily between Maryland Route 3 and Racetrack Road and frequently see traffic bumper to bumper in this section. Do you have a study that will describe the impact of construction equipment entering and exiting to the planned retreat center?
The traffic impact studies typically do not evaluate construction equipment, like the construction phase. In some cases, they do for much larger construction projects. We've done some very large power plant construction and things where you have thousands and thousands of employees coming in daily. And they get shift worked in by bus because there's so many people that it would overwhelm the network to try to get them on site, and there's not enough place for them to park on site. This is not that type of project. This is small in nature. I would envision that the construction traffic would not have a significant impact and would be short-term in nature.
And let me add, Mike, that construction access would probably follow the same path of access to the land bay to maintain sensitive nature of the site. So construction phasing would be accommodated in the overall program as well. It wouldn't be any additional disturbance for construction access.
Right.
Okay, and I have a related question that someone asked about what will be the impact on the nearby watersheds like the Patuxent. So it gets to that question of how much disturbance will occur.
Father, I'll take that question.
Thank you, please.
If you consider that we're proposing a disturbance of approximately 5 acres on a 37-acre site, the first objective that we would reach would be to minimize the disturbed area. Secondly, we would follow all the appropriate measures for maintaining erosion and sediment control. We would also provide additional measures for controlling outlets of the area under construction to the waterways to protect the waterways from that. There are additional monitoring requirements and redundant stormwater and sediment settling systems that are deployed on this type of construction project that you would see utilized. And that would all be developed as the sediment and erosion control plans are developed during the design phase of the project. And ultimately, the stormwater management and water quality management systems that we design for the overall project will protect the water quality in the ultimate ongoing condition of this project.
Okay, thank you, Tim. I'd like to remind everyone we're looking for additional questions, additional topics that haven't been covered. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the question and answers box. I have one last question up here on the list, and that is, have there been any studies to determine where the unmarked slave graves are on the property to ensure that those sacred graves are not disturbed? Father?
Yes, so there have been a couple of archaeological studies of this White Marsh property. There has been no evidence found of any kind of graves on this property. It's also just historically unlikely that there would be there. You know, the enslaved people were baptized by the Jesuits and were considered Christian, and so they would have been given a burial in a dignified place. So, but archaeological studies haven't found any evidence of graves on the site. Tim, you know some of those studies. I don't know if you'd have anything to add to that.
Yes, Father. During the natural resources inventory phase of the project, an extensive archaeological survey was performed. There were historic or archaeological artifacts found on the property. There's detailed studies of those. They are not on this property. They are on other parcels of the Jesuit holdings. So this area is found to be free of such cultural resources, which were not found on this 37 acres.
Okay, and a related question that came up was, is the archaeological study available?
Well, it was submitted to Prince George's County as a part of the basic plan process a few years ago. So I believe it is available through Maryland National Capital Park and Planning records on this property.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Another question that came in that may have been covered before, but the frequency of how often the retreat center would be used, just in a general sense. Could you recap that again, Father?
Sure. So again, based off the Atlanta, we provided some data. It's on average a pretty low intensity use because people tend to come for the beginning of their program, stay for the program, and then only leave when the program is over. and again, those the center is not that large. There are 75 rooms in it. So again, some people come for longer stays, weekend retreats, week-long retreats, even a month-long retreat. Other people would come for shorter programs that might be just during the day or an evening program. But the sort of, as you saw from, if you think about what are the capacities that I talked about. So there were 75 bedrooms. There's a large chapel that can accommodate 80 people. There are dining facilities that could accommodate 100 people. So those are kind of your maximum intensity numbers at any point in time, but that it wouldn't be at those levels continuously.
Okay, thank you for the answer. One resident or one participant asked whether the slides of the presentation will be available. Is that something that we would be allowed to post on our website, Father?
If there's a desire for that, we could certainly consider that. And as you said, the YouTube and the whole recording is going to be posted and available, which contains the explanation that goes with the slides.
Okay, that's true. I think we are starting to cover over some or retread some of the ground we've already covered tonight. So what I'd like to do is just give people one last chance to ask some questions. And while I'm doing that, wanted to just, if we could have you all reiterate when you anticipate starting the approval process for the project, maybe just give people another outline of that timetable, and then I'll come back and close the meeting. Father?
And I'm going to hand that to Brad, who's the one who would shepherd this for us. Yes. So.
I would imagine that we would seek the legislative change to allow the use of the property during the upcoming spring session of the county council. Obviously, that's not our decision as far as that'd be our preference, but that's not our decision. That's going to be for further conversations with members of the county council. And then obviously we also want we seek and would much appreciate to have the support of the city of Bowie in that endeavor. If that were to occur, then it's just a question of how long it takes to get the next step in the process being the preliminary plan of subdivision. That's when you start to get into more of the actual engineering and design of the facility. So that's going to take that's got a bit of a longer runway, because that's not just a document. Now you're actually starting to design the site. That's when Tim and his team and Courtney really roll up their sleeves and start working on how the site's going to get laid out. And that's when Mike Leinart and his group with traffic really starts to engage with SHA and have conversations about traffic studies with park and planning and what have you. So that's when I say that to say that's when a lot of the true substantive engineering starts, and that's going to take several months. So I would imagine preliminary plan of subdivision could be the fall of next year, could be the spring thereafter. And a lot of these decisions also come down to our client, Father Hussey and the church, as far as what they want to see happen and the tempo and the pace at which they would like to move forward. But at least that a first initial step would be that piece of legislation, and ideally our preference at least would be for that to move forward in the spring.
Okay, Father, would you have any closing remarks?
Just once again, my thanks for people for their attentiveness and interest in this project. We hope that this is a project that will be appealing to the area. It offers the wonderful resource of a spiritual center to the people. It does it at a very low intensity kind of use, and so preserves much of the land's beauty and wooded character, and that would be preserved into the future. And so it's a way of a way that I hope would be attractive to people in the area, that both allows us to use that property in a way that fits with who we are, but does so very respectful of the desires for maintaining the character of that part of the area of Bowie. So I hope it's appealing to everyone all around. It's a good way to incorporate the interests of everyone in the area involved. And thanks again for your interest and support today.
Well, thank you, Father, and for your team and the excellent presentation that you provided. We are looking forward to bringing the legislative initiative to the City Council's attention at the time that that's filed, and we would appreciate being kept in the loop on that. As I mentioned at the outset, this meeting is being recorded. It will be filed on the city's YouTube channel for future viewing. And I'd like to thank all of our participants and attendees for coming out tonight. Stay tuned and pay attention to the city website, where we'll post the traffic study, and feel free to contact the planning department if you have any further questions or need more information. So I'd like to thank you all tonight for a very productive meeting, and we look forward to cooperating with you in the future. So long.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. We appreciate your effort.
Yep. Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too.